Mais bonjour. Okay, you're back here because you want some more, okay? I have had enough of Akota or A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas for the people who've been living in a cave. But this book is all over BookTube. It seems to be that there's a frenzy about it, and I was thinking maybe I should go for it, maybe I should read it, and I thought no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to read something a little different perhaps, but still in the YA fantasy genre. So I picked up Give the Dark My Love by Beth Revis, and I had high hopes. So why this in particular? Well, at the time I was reading a lot of fan fiction, and it involved a lot of smut between teachers and students. It wasn't underage because I'm not a perv, but still I think the domination side was dawning on me. So long story short, this is about a successful but poor and clever chosen one who's like one of two twins, and she's like selected by this really posh school to like attend, and she has to mingle with these rich and arsey kids. Her aim here is to find a cure to a necromantic curse that is like plaguing her whole island and killing hundreds. But as the old adage says, you often have to fight fire with fire, and she will kind of dabble a little bit in necromancy, which is kind of inevitable. So we'll start with a few pros and then some cons and then my verdict, and then I'll give you like an industry perspective on like if I, as a development assistant, would like to adapt this or not, if this is a good idea. The world building was actually pretty good. Like, there is a little map that I will try and show on the screen now. This takes place on an island called Lunar Island, and it's like a colony that's attached to this main empire called Alarian Empire, and that mainland kind of looks a bit like Westeros in the Song of Ice and Fire, which itself already looked a lot like Britain. So do whatever you want with that information. So it all takes place on that island, and I thought the lore of this world it wasn't massive and extensive, but it's only one book, but it was really skillfully placed. I thought that the author was sprinkling like information here and there very skillfully, and it wasn't too forced. But certainly like the scientific and like reality side of that kind of magic system is always very appealing. I also really like the way the author managed to represent grief, and especially since Nidro is going to lose a lot of dear people because of the plague. For someone that has lost someone dear to me, I really identified with it, and it was very important, that side. So this was really well done. But that side of things was only in the second half, and this is our transition with the cons here. This book is literally cut in half. The first side is very slow and tropey, but the second one is fast-paced and really interesting. The whole like grief and slow descent into darkness and necromancy really happens in the second half of the book, but that meant that the first half was just really slow. Obviously we'll meet Nidra in a small town, and she's quite poor, and she gets this place at this school, so we have the whole voyage to this main city to go to the school, and then she has to adapt, and then she meets everyone, and then she discovers about the plague. And I feel like it would have worked probably better if it was condensed in maybe like the first third of the book, but this was just too long and too tropey. And that kind of brings me to how like these characters are so classic YA, like they're so predictable. Nidra is your typical YA girl, like she's the chosen one, she's one of two twins, she's really good at magic even though she's only learned from like her grandma's books. You know, the main man is going to like her because she's different and she's not like other girls. But then the other characters are also quite tropey. The main love interest was just like this really posh boy, and he's a bit brooding, but he's also quite predictable. And we get like the angsty best friend of that boy that's really rejecting Nidra because she's poor and disgusting. And you get the teacher that's obviously favoring her even though she's just arrived in this school. It was a bit weird. And in terms of pacing, you know, like this book is actually kind of like cut in two half in terms of rhythm, because the author chose to use two POVs in there. So you've got the POV of Nidra, but also the POV of Grey. I'll try and show you. So all the chapters will be like having obviously their number, but the name of the person that we're going to have the POV from. So it's going to be either Nidra or Grey, And I just didn't know why. Like, he was not a very compelling character, and they weren't multi-dimensionals anyway, so having the POV of like the love interest was just really weird. And speaking of love interest, I thought he was just a bit rubbish. Our main man, Gray, he's got the typical like rich kid like issues. It reminded me a bit of Helen in like the Mistborn series.
Oh, you touch my tra-la-la.
This like son of a noble that's really kind of hated by his dad, and it was like really angsty and difficult, and this was exactly it, like the main love interest having a difficult family life. And the main point of this character is to woo Nidra so much that when she has to choose either the dark path with the necromancy, which is illegal and sick and wrong, or the light, then her love for him will just pull her back to the light. But it doesn't happen because he's crap at romance. So the blatant example we have here is like Nidra will ask him to accompany her to the hospital the day after because they need to like work on this plague and try and save some people. And Gray's like, oh yeah, I'll come with you tomorrow. Yeah, let's meet downstairs, blah, blah, blah. Day after, she's waiting for him outside the dormitories and he doesn't turn up. He just sort of like pides her off a bit. So she's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go and do my own thing. And later on she meets him, and the only excuse he has is like, oh well, they're kind of poor and they're a bit dirty, and I don't really know like if I want to, you know, like mingle with like all the death, because like what if I catch it? And he's just acting a bit like a bitch. Their whole point together is to learn alchemy in order to save people, but to find a cure. And he's just acting like, oh, I don't know, like, But they're still trying really hard to make it work, where clearly they don't share the same goal. It doesn't work. And then the last thing that kind of bothered me with this book is like the representation of the LGBTQ plus community. There's a couple of like characters like scattered around the books that have this specificity about them, which is great. You'll think, oh, you know, representation, hurrah. Except, and I don't want to cry wolf there, but it felt a lot like queer baiting. A lot of the characters that are gay in there don't really make any changes to the plot point. They don't really like bring anything. They feel very much like, I need two characters there to emphasize how Nidra is not like all powerful, so I'll make them gay because that's really cool. If you're not going to give us a bit more, then what's the point? And I'm all for more representation, but we have to be very careful with it because there hasn't been enough yet of representation. So make it count, make it mean something. Don't just throw it there because like everyone's desperate for it. Just make it count. So my verdict for this is 2 stars. And I know it sounds a bit harsh, but it was so textbook YA, but with like a bad romance, that it just felt too forced. The characters were so flat. There was just the lore and the magic system and the world building was so great. It was such a shame that the characters weren't more polished, and this LGBT thing was just made me really tick. So now for the industry perspective. So as an assistant development, if I picked up this book, would I adapt it or would I recommend it to my boss? So first of all, funny enough, I purchased this secondhand, and there was a funny stamp there. I'm not going to show because there's like an address and a phone number, but it's like a literary agent from like Paris that purchased it. So at first I thought, oh, like either someone's wanting to translate this in French, which means it's quite popular and quite good, or someone wants to make something out of it. Maybe a French agency wanted to grab it, and being the first one, I know that fantasy is like slowly starting up in France. But I haven't seen anything as of late, so what does it mean, really? And you know, like, one of the main pet peeves for people like me is to find characters that are so flat that there's nothing to be done. Like, the world building is so good, but building up a character and giving it shape and dimension has to be done throughout a book or a series of books. This is how you see a progression. The evolution of a character is what we're looking for to adapt in a story. And I haven't found that in there. The characters are just too flat, man, and there's nothing that we could salvage with a script editor, so this would just not work on that level. Although, you know, I can't be just rude all the time and negative, so the premises are actually really good, and they're very trendy, so there's a lot of potential with it. That's probably why this French literary agent picked it up, because, well, it's super, like, contemporary. Obviously, the whole pandemic thing is very actual, so that works really well. This, like, sort of political side of things is quite trendy nowadays in fantasy books in general. I mean, certainly A Song of Ice and Fire had a lot of political intrigues. But you know, Miss Bourne has that as well. Mrs. Revis really seemed to know her craft in that regard, but will it be enough? Well, I don't think so. And it's mainly because of this one character that I just cannot fathom why you would write them like this. I'm gonna put this here now because I'm tired of holding it. Okay, so the main reason why I dislike this book is because of Nidra's sister Nessie. So this is a character that we don't know much about, except for that she stays in the home village. She's not as clever as her sister. She just has other strengths, I guess. I don't know. But her main thing, apparently, is that she's bisexual. The way she was portrayed, it was just awful. She's like a stone hard bitch, and I hated it. I'll read just a little passage. "Kiln?" I asked. "The fisherman's boy." A group of children raced past us, shouting to each other. "The fisherman's man," Ernest said. "Pulling up nets all day does wonderful things to your biceps." I laughed at her enthusiasm. Kiln was only the flavour of the month. Ernesta was as easily distracted by beautiful men and women alike. But I was glad to see she was over Carver, the shoemaker's apprentice who died from the plague soon after I left Youngin. Bitch, what? From my understanding, Nessie was involved romantically with a girl called Carver who died from the plague, and a little while later she's just dating someone else. As if. This is my biggest problem with this book. It's just really unrealistic. And if it was a straight relationship, I'd be like, okay, it's just a badly written straight relationship. But because we've got so few and far between representations of someone that's got a different sexuality around, it's just a bit unuseful and unnecessary. So let's just put this into context a little bit now. So imagine you're in the middle of a pandemic. I know, easy to do. And you are dating this person and things are going well. They're not the love of your life maybe, but you enjoy being with them. You're dating them, right? It's cool, like even if it hasn't been a while. And then they die from the pandemic. Are you telling me, for real, that a couple of weeks or a couple of months later, you're back on the horse?
I don't think so.
It was so unrealistic, and it's just bad. And this being YA, you can be sure as hell that there's going to be younger people watching this if this was to be adapted, or even reading it. I was a bit miffed by it. It was not very good. But anyway, I wouldn't recommend this book to my boss. I don't think it's viable, and I don't think it's something that should be done. But it was a story that was worth reading if you can get past the things that annoyed me. You know, the lore was all right, so to each their own, I guess. And I actually found out that this book has a sequel that came out in 2019 called Bid My Soul Farewell, and I don't think I will pick it up because this LGBT stuff just pissed me off too much. Sorry. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, even though it was a rant and I wasn't very happy with it. If you enjoyed this YA rant from a French person that's really tired of flat ass people, like and subscribe, you guys. In the meantime, salut!